My name is Glenn Harris. I'm the Director of Prevention at the Ohio Domestic Violence Network, also facilitate an organization that we call OHMAN. OHMAN is an acronym for Ohio Men's Action Network. With this action network and the work that I do with ODVN is to prevent violence, very specifically gender-based violence. And when we say gender-based violence, it's not just violence against women, but against everybody that we see in our culture and our communities. And we want to make sure that the work that we're doing is being very inclusive to include everyone that experiences harm in any way that they choose to identify, whether it's gender, sexuality, however that expression may be, make sure that they're safe in our world and our communities. One of the things that I've experienced growing up is I've swam in this ocean of masculinity, right? And I've had friends and colleagues that would use language and slurs and jokes that's very, very offensive and harmful to many of my friends that you're going to hear from today. And what we're going to have a conversation about is how we change that. Jeff, you've used the analogy about the ocean a little bit. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Introduce yourself.
Sure. So my name is Jeff Booster. I'm with SARNCO here at Ohio Health, and we are the Rape Crisis Center for Central Ohio. Specifically, what I do is engaging men and a prevention coordinator. So I work a lot on college campuses, in particular with athletes, because oftentimes athletes are considered or looked at as leaders within a campus. And I believe if we're going to prevent sexual violence, we need to look towards those leaders to influence that culture. I also work with young men who are incarcerated in our juvenile detention facilities, and I really enjoy that work because they have some fabulous things to talk about and in their experiences. But oftentimes when I think about this issue, because I like analogies, and this is not mine, it's not, I don't own this, I borrowed it from somebody else, and I've heard Tony Porter say this as well, is that oppression, whatever oppression we're looking at it, whether it be racism or sexism or any kind of oppression, it's not the shark in the water, it's the water that we're all in. It's the water that's around us. And so I think conversations like what we had this morning, for me, that was just more awareness of the water that I'm in, that we're all experiencing these forms of oppression, but we experience that in different ways according to our identities and our experiences, and I think that's what's incredibly important. So. This conversation was incredible. It was just eye-opening and just so enriching for me.
Hi, I'm Javon Howard. My pronouns are he, him, his. I'm the manager of engagement initiatives with the Ohio Alliance to End Sexual Violence. My role with the Alliance essentially is doing the training and technical assistance for engaging men as male survivors of sexual violence, as well as in violence prevention to end violence against women, girls, boys, and men. This conversation is very important to me because I believe that everyone deserves to live free from violence. I've always been very social justice oriented. I love people. I love community. I believe that everyone should have the right to live free from violence, to be able to pursue life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, regardless of their race, their age, their sexual orientation, their class, where they live, where they're from, their history, their geography. And so this conversation is really important for us as Ohioans, as community members, as villagers sharing this planet and community together, to be able to learn to live together, to coexist, to disrupt and transform power, and privilege and prejudice in order for us to have a more just and free society.
Hi, my name is Laura Niehaus, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers. I am the Outreach and Training Coordinator for BRAVO, which stands for the Buckeye Region Anti-Violence Organization. We're a division of Equitas Health, and we are focused on serving survivors of violence from the LGBTQ plus community. So that's relationship violence, sexual violence, hate and bias-based violence, state and police violence. And we also work with service providers and different systems that serve survivors and teach them how we can be in conversation to become more culturally humble when serving survivors from this community in a way that is not re-traumatizing, in a way that is affirming and healing and allows and empowers people to have equitable access to safety, resources, and healing and whatever form of justice they feel they need. So I am incredibly excited to have been a part of bringing these voices together to share their stories, because as a steering committee, we have talked so much about what we see and what we would like to see. And Jeff, you brought up the water is the issue. It's not the shark in the water, it's the water. How do we change the water? You can't do it yourself, and you can't do it until you acknowledge that there's a problem. And so in order to start doing that, we need to start asking each other and being curious about each other's experiences, our perspectives, what brings us joy, what brings us fear, and how we can coexist together in a way that moves us forward and allows us to grow. So we very much recognize that this is just the start of a conversation between the LGBTQ plus community and those who want to support and uplift and learn more about people that maybe they've not had the experience to interact with before. We recognize that we only had 6 chairs today, and so we only had 6 voices. But in the future, we will be including so many more voices. And if you're interested in becoming part of the conversation, please get in contact with us. We brought this group together in preparation for the screening that we are going to be doing of the film Intentionally Erased, which is a conversation between trans Black women and cisgender heterosexual Black men. In our panel today, we did not represent the transgender and non-binary community, and we recognize that those voices are missing. But I hope and we will not only just hope, but we will work towards including intentionally those voices more actively in the future, especially in the conversation before we screen the film and after, and the next courageous conversation.
Thank you all for taking the time to follow this conversation. At the end of the conversation, we will share some additional resources for you. We'll have some books. We'll have some different people you can follow on social media, just so you can be more active and you can be more aware, so you can understand and learn and know the language that we are using in our classrooms, in our boardrooms, and in our playgrounds. We look forward to this conversation. We hope that you learn. And for any of you who would like to be part of this conversation, please reach out to OHMAN, the Ohio Men's Action Network. You can find us on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and just Google OHMAN.
Hey everyone, I'm Joey Taggart. I use any pronouns. I work with Equitas Health. I'm here today to be a part of a conversation, one that I didn't know other people needed to have, one that has been long overdue, and I am honestly curious to bring what I have within me to the conversation and take, more importantly, what everyone else has to share home with me.
Good morning, all. My name is Roy Lutz. I work with Safe on Main in Warren County. My pronouns are he, him, his. I think I come to this space in large part for 2 reasons. One, professionally, it's what I do. I teach healthy relationships both in school-based and community-based programs, and from a lens of anti-violence. And then I would say personally, I come into this space because I know some people here have shared that they have some little kids, and I once too had these little kids that were just blank slates, and I didn't know who they were going to be as people, as parents, as adults, as human beings in this world. As it's turned out, 2 of my 3 children identify as LGBTQ, and I've had to witness the intolerance and the injustices that they experience on a daily basis, and I have to feel that, and I have to see their pain. So I'm here because that just shouldn't happen. A parent, a dad, shouldn't have to see his kids go through that. So I want to be part of that conversation in changing this for them and for everybody.
I'm Chance. I'm 23. I have 2 kids. I go to OSU. I'm a student there. I study mathematics. I guess the reason I'm here today to discuss, to have this courageous conversation would be that I want the world to be a safe space for all LGBTQ people. I don't want them to, have to worry about coming outside and being who they are and expressing their truth, because I feel like everyone deserves that. And I don't want to live in any type of oppressive structure, even if I'm not the one being oppressed. Also, I want to help end the stigma for Black men, that if they're an ally, if they're being decent towards LGBTQ people, that isn't any deficiency on them. That's how it should be. That's how it's supposed to be, because they are also oppressed. You know what I mean? They don't want, for instance, white people, keeping them down and stuff like that. And also, I want the future to just to be a better place. I want my kids to, grow up in an environment where, everybody's respected and just a better place in general.
Hi, everyone. I'm Brandon Thompson. I'm the outreach coordinator for the Survivor Advocacy Outreach Program. It's a rape crisis center based in Athens County. I'm a father of two. I'm 43 years old, so I grew up in the 80s and 90s, which was a wild time. And, there's a lot of things I've recently been learning about healthy masculinity and like how it's affected me and hurt me, and mostly just hurt me, honestly. And I'm not interested in having my kids go through that again, And so one of the things that I'm really interested in is, growing up, I live in a predominantly white area with a black family, so I was moving constantly between my black family in Chicago and then white people in Athens, and the conversations are different around this conversation, And so seeing that, I always remember my aunt Jeanette and her friend, and that stuff like that, people in the black community understand that, always came for Thanksgiving. They were just friends. They lived together, but, and seeing that now, I'm like, what? Wait a minute, why couldn't she just be out? And realizing that I was part of that problem. I never always thought like, hey, you know what? Like, nah, I don't have anything bad about that, but like, I'm not actively doing anything. And so my thoughts are, I think I'm a good person. I know there's people way worse than I am. If I think this way, and I'm not doing anything, what's the rest of the world doing? And so one of my other jobs is I work as a DJ. And so I interact with a lot of different people, and so I see a lot of different conversations and realize that like a lot of people are doing nothing, and that, we need to have these conversations. So like, if I can't push myself, what do I expect other people to do? So that's why I'm really interested in just really learning, because I think when we did earlier introductions, I thought I was an ally, but I'm not. Not using slurs is not an ally. You have to actively think about people. And so just trying to get some other tools so I can share with my kids so the world that they grow up in is just better, because that's what we all hope is that we want the world to be better. We all remember being, in the 90s, if you were there, it's like, oh yeah, your generation's going to figure it out. You're so accepting of I think at the time it was of gay people existing, and like it was such a bare minimum. And so now, we're doing more. And so just trying to like figure out that, 20 years later, we're still talking about the same stuff. And so we've got to push these conversations, I think, further and harder and be more authentic, because there is so much more hurt out there that we can affect.
My name is Shalil Tillman. I use he, him, his pronouns. I am the Associate Store Manager for Buck Mason, ETC. I am also a youth advocate for SIMBA, a male initiative group program started here in Columbus, Ohio. I'm a part of this conversation because I've been very fortunate in my experience, and growing up I recognized that I was a bit privileged, and I didn't really understand why until I recognized that my mom and the people that I was surrounded with, everyone didn't have that. And so when I recognized that, I realized it's important for me to learn more about those who didn't have my experience and make sure that I'm put in spaces where I can aid them, where information can be brought to them, when information that they have can be brought to spaces that it needs to be had. And I'm really excited to be here.
I'm Ron Murray. I he, him pronouns. The board president of Stonewall Columbus, the board president of OHMAN Franklin County. Also, I'm the associate director of health advocacy at Equitas Health. This conversation is important to me because I realized that in 2023, we shouldn't still be having these type of conversations, and that the fact that we're still having them means there's so much more to go. And understanding that how we amplify and use our voices and spaces and privileges that we have to use these spaces, we set the precedence for those who are coming after us. So how I use the voice, how I define who I am, and how I speak up sets the precedence for generations to come after me. And that's a responsibility I take seriously for myself and those to come after me.
Well, thank you all for that your introductions. I'm gonna go ahead and just get into the first question. What has violence looked like to you in your community? So thinking about your identity, where you're from, yourself as a man, what has violence looked like to you in your community?
Violence towards LGBTQ people or just violence in general?
Just violence in general. We can get more specific about the community. Or you can talk about violence about yourself. What does violence look like to you in your community?
If I could jump in, I think where violence and what violence looked like in my community. I'm going to speak from Roy as a youth. In my community, I grew up very poor. I grew up in apartments. I grew up around other poor people. I grew up in situations where I was, I guess, and to use Shalil's word, I was privileged to see some of that and how that impacted people, and how normalized it was for me to just have a friend come outside, and if I would speak to some violence that was occurring in my home, they related like it was nothing. I mean, it wasn't shocking. It wasn't something that they were just, oh my gosh, really, Roy? That's what happened in your house? Because it was going on in their homes as well. And I think one of the, kind of growing up with those social norms around violence, it caused me to go through a whole life, and I'm going to be 51 this weekend, and it's caused me my whole life to default to the concepts of violence. When I am frustrated, when I'm going through something, I want to resort back to that part of me, that child of me that just wants to lash out and grab a hold of things and control them. And I think specifically with the, since we're here on the LGBTQ topic, one of the ways that I saw violence normalized in that community or in communities towards that community was when I was 13, my mom introduced me to a really cool guy. His name was Madison Wright, and we were in San Francisco at the time. And he was an openly gay man, and this was in the early 80s. And he brought me to my first musical and play, Brighton Beach Memoirs. And I remember he was just the greatest guy, so cool. And he passed away from AIDS in the mid-'80s. And I remember hearing that was the cure for homosexuality. And I just knew that was such a violent word and language that was used. And I think that was the time that I became so aware and acutely aware that language is violence and how that impacted people. And it's just something that just as a kid just resonated with me, that he was just a great man. And people just treated him so violently they didn't even know him. And I don't know, that's kind of how some of the ways that violence impacted me and has been part of my life.
I'll say I grew up very distant from violence. I never really was in spaces that had a lot of violence. And even the violence within our own community, I wasn't very aware of until I read the Laramie Project. And I couldn't believe that an entire community of people had a questionable stance against what happened to Matthew. That I thought, when I read what happened to him and what the two gentlemen did to him and how they left him where they left him, I thought that was absolutely ridiculous and sad. And the fact that there were a community of people who were not sure if they were upset with the men or appreciative of what they did to Matthew was benign to me. And just from a human standpoint, not even regarding his sexuality or who he was as a person, just the fact that we were all looking at this human and watching him struggle to stay alive and questioning whether it was a good or a bad thing. That was the first introduction, and it opened my eyes to the fact that this is happening around me. This is happening in a community that I belong in, and the more I learned that kind of violence existed, the more eager I was to find ways to stop it, to create spaces where people don't feel like that's the kind of violence that they need to partake in. So yeah, and that was later. I mean, I was a junior in high school, and I was reading the book for a performance. And I decided not to do the performance because I emotionally could not handle what happened in that book. And so, yeah. The author of the book. Well, it's the Tectonic Theater of New York City. The leader of the Tectonic Theater at the time, and I can't remember his name, he asked them to go to Wyoming and interview the people of the to Laramie and interview the people of the city. And the city is predominantly Mormon, and that is why there was such an aggressive stance towards whether he should live or not. The doctor performing on Matthew was Mormon himself and frequented the Mormon church. And he was getting death threats and letters saying, you should stop working on this person. God has done what he is supposed to do to handle Matthew being a virus. And that was jarring. And still even thinking about, I actually just lended the book to someone the other day, and they called me about 3 days into reading it and said they had to take a break. And because it's so intense. And then to think about how his father, a non-queer, someone who is not in the LGBTQ community, talk about his decision on what should happen to the men that did what they did to Matthew, was also just very hard to wrap my mind around, because that was very humane of him. But me, 17-year-old in high school, I was angry. I didn't have the grace that Matthew's father had. And so then I had to understand what that looked like. And that was intense. That was intense. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I'm going to interject a little bit. I'm noticing in some of the introductions and in some of your responses, there's this concept that's coming out that there's a low awareness about the amount of violence that the LGBTQ community is experiencing. That we know that it is something that's prevalent, but at the same time, there's this lack of awareness. So like trans lives, the average age of a trans person is 32 years old. Over 40% of homeless youth identify as LGBTQ. 1 in 3 gay men experience some form of sexual or domestic violence. And then we were talking about this experience here. So this is something that happens pretty prevalently in our society, in our culture. Why do you think this is something that people are not aware of?
If I could speak to that, I don't think people aren't aware of it, they just aren't caring enough. It's not making headline news. Like if we go back to, we're talking about violence in specifically the LGBT community, I remember, if we go back to the reckoning of 2020 and after the George Floyd, everything happened. If you remember in June, right after everything happened with George Floyd, and then in June, you had a black trans woman attacked at a gas station. The next month, another black trans woman was killed in Dallas. The month after that, there was 15 black trans women killed in that whole summer, but there was no hashtags or marches for them. That emerged, the Black Trans Lives Matter movement happened during that summer. And so people were thinking, oh, now here comes the homos trying to co-opt the Black Lives Matter movement. But no one thought that the Black Lives Matter movement was started by 3 queer women, right? So the reason it erupted was because black bodies were slain. They didn't ask about the sexuality. It was the color of their skin. Looked like it prompted that thing, but then when you dug deeper into it. So as a black gay man, I'm double fucked, because I got to worry about racists and I got to worry about my brothers at the same time. And so it's not that people aren't caring. People don't know it's not happening. People aren't caring enough to say something about it. Because I realized something recently is that I'm okay with you attacking my brother or sister over here and not saying anything because I agree with it. But let me give you an example. I'm a social worker by trade, and I run groups sometimes. Back in the day, I don't do it anymore. And so I remember one time I was doing a substance use group. It was a women's group, and all-female group, and I was the supervisor, person running the group, and the facilitator said, well, Ron, we have a trans woman who just joined the group, and the women in the group are uncomfortable because she's in the group with them. Why? Well, and then the one woman is sitting there all day in the group, and she's just telling her, you shouldn't be here, you're not like us, you're not this and this and this. How do I deal with that? And I looked at her like, what the hell you mean, how do you deal with that? I said, if that woman was white and the woman was black, the trans woman was a black woman, and the white women were saying, you're not supposed to be here because you're black, you would be upset. You would put her ass out there in a heartbeat. Yeah, what's the difference? The difference is because you agree with her. But you don't want to say that publicly because we haven't announced it's okay to have your own implicit, explicit biases, but you also have to answer to that. So the reason I'm not speaking out about the violence that's happening is because I actually agree with it. But if I say it out loud, then it makes it too real for me, and I'm going to be what they are, what I protest against. And that's what the issue is. The lack of transparency and honesty is not happening. I would rather you be a racist right next to me and say, I don't like you because you're a nigger and you're a faggot, and be right next to me and somebody who's next to me holding a banner with me, but you're secretly under an anonymous name hashtagging it on Twitter, just saying how disgusting you are beside me. And that's happened before. I can work with somebody who I know what the cards are, because we can work together. I can't work with a wolf in sheep's clothing. That's the difference.
Yeah.
Ron, you made a really cool statement in the beginning that just resonated with me when you said you don't think it's about awareness, right? I mean, people are aware. I agree with you completely. I mean, I think back to, I grew up in the era where Mr. Rogers, Fred Rogers, was just, he was my world as a kid. And I wasn't old enough to have seen live when he and Francois Clemens both put their feet in the pool together and shared a towel together in a time where, with the racial injustices that were going on, were impacting people on a daily basis. And Fred Rogers, created this opportunity, I don't think awareness, because that's where I agree with you, Ron, is that I don't think it was awareness. I think it was an expression of care. And I just think to myself about LGBTQ issues today, LGBTQIA+, transgender issues. I just think to myself often, what would be his representation of care today? Would it be a story time with drag queens? Would it be, what would be his expression of care to help people understand, and see that through that similar lens that he did with Francois Clemens? I just, with this population, I think he would do an expression of care, but not about awareness, because I too think that awareness is already there. They already know, these people in the communities already are aware of who's in our communities and aware that they've always been here. But I think I just feel that this is a personal choice to exclude, to diminish, to not let them represent and be represented in our communities the way they need to be and want to be. So,
I agree with both of your points. I think today awareness is more of an excuse. Like, unless you live under a rock, you cannot not be aware of people in the LGBTQ community. It's like you're being complacent. You're not helping. You're not helping that progression. Like, you're just being complacent. And yeah. So I agree with both of you guys.
I think, to your point and to yours as well, I think I remember that point with Mr. Rogers, and I think that if he did it today, I don't think people would get it, because everybody think it was so performative. Everybody wants a viral moment. They would think, oh, he's just doing it just what the kids say, the front for the gram. Is that the right word? The cap. And so I think that it would get lost, because so many people are trying to make these statement moments. I think that moment is lost sometimes. I also think awareness, I heard this a long time ago, transformative versus performative. What does those both mean? Performative really means that I did it just to put on a show. It's a performance. Transformative means that I have transformed the mindset of myself and those around me to a place where we can't go back to how we thought before. It would be imbecilic to do that. And so we're in this space where we're now challenging paradigms. When that paradigm begins to shift, and you've always benefited from the privilege of that ignorant ass thinking of that paradigm, you then buckle down and get angry. That's when violence starts happening. When I challenge what you've always known, when I tell you the world is round, and you thought it was flat for many years, then you want to start fighting me. When I tell you Jesus might have been a black man, and you know the hell he's not, he was a white man, and he only wants to say white people, and that's why you need to be enslaved. Now we got to shoot you and put a cross on your front lawn. We begin violence when we challenge, when we're no longer privileged from what was in control of that majority. And so I think that's what's happening now. I think that one of the conversations I had with Glenn was, he was saying that people start watching shows because it's this gay agenda happening. What agenda? I missed it. What revolution? Right.
I don't think that we were stepping out saying, hey guys, this is our agenda. A lot of our opportunities to speak about what's happening in our community are just that. We have been so afraid for so long that sometimes ourselves are lost. And so when we are speaking, we're looking to be found, we're looking to be seen, we're looking to be respected in our humanity. We're looking for the opportunity to exist freely. And I think that the agenda it's not even ours. We didn't create it. I don't have an agenda. I'm telling you who I am in hopes that it will better help you present yourself in spaces with people like me.
I love that.
Both moved, and I need to get your mailing address so I can get you the agenda.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. It's forward only lasts like 30 days, so we'll get that.
Yeah, I'm really.
I think that we all get put into a position where we're only allowed to react versus actually respond to an issue. And for that first time, with the awareness, a lot of voices are being found right now, so we don't just have to react to the situation. We actually get to respond. We get to speak up as members of the community. We get to define what it's like to be a member, to show what it is to truly come out with masculinity per se. Let us define what that is, no longer what it's perceived to us, no longer under the slave name of masculinity. You don't tell me what it is, I get to tell me what it is because it's mine, it's for me. And I don't know what it's going to take to move it forward, to get past this violence in this thing. How many puppies in a car is it going to take for people to break those windows so we can get out there and be free and push the message across to everyone that we all have the right to live?
Joey, I really loved what you were saying, and you are bringing up this term masculinity. So I'm interested to hear from the group on this question about how do we go about being a man?
I think one thing that jumps out to me is just this conversation. I just love this because, again, I come from a real place of privilege in so much that when I was a kid in the early '70s, I got to watch, and I don't know if anybody here remembers. I'm really probably going to date myself here, but Marlo Thomas and the whole movement. It was called "Free to Be," and there was a song. It was "Free to Be You and Me," and this was a song that was very popular in the early '70s, and it said, "I get to grow to be who I want to be, and you get to grow who you want to be, and we're gonna, in hand, we're gonna live free to be you and me." I came from a privilege, I guess, where I thought that was solved in the '70s. I really have oftentimes thought to myself, why are we still talking about this? And I mean, with regards to masculinity, that was something that as a kid, I was raised in a home with all women. So I didn't take mechanics class and shop class in school. I took sewing and cooking. Because that was what I was interested in. But back then, I remember being differentiated by my classmates. Why are you taking that class with all the girls, Roy? It was a reflection of my masculinity that I wanted to cook and figure out how to sew, which has benefited me as a father. I sew all my kids' clothes and I do all the cooking in our home. I don't know. I don't know how to answer that question. How do we address masculinity other than, I guess, to Joey's point, is when do we get to just be ourselves and not have to answer to it or explain it to anybody?
Yeah, I think I agree with what you're saying. Like, it's hard to define what being a man is, but also I think it's not really important. I think you should just be who you are. I think the categorization and like putting people in like the masculine box is the source of a lot of problems, and it's why a lot of men perpetrate violence, because they're trying to be a man when they could just be themselves.
It's sometimes I always have to relate this to like dungeon dice, and it's like you're creating a D&D character or something, that when you decide that or somebody's decided for you that masculinity is your option, you get to throw that dice. Unfortunately, you only get 5 or 6 traits, and 4 of them have to be a phobia, a misia, or an ism. And that's incorrect. Define that masculinity is a fiber in our fabric or our rope of life, whatever you want to use the analogy there. And that's for you to define how that fiber, what strength that plays among everything else there. If it's you finding your voice and speaking up, great. Let that be your masculinity. And masculinity should never be associated with gender. Those are 2 separate things. That's a whole nother piece of fiber in that rope or in the fabric. Yeah, like you get to set the rules for this. There's no one to take that from you.
I like that you use the term decision making, because I think that's often the problem. We don't get to make a decision. When we're in 5th grade and we're watching the sex video, not once do they talk about non-heterosexual sex. And so for me as a fifth grader, I was very well aware that I was not a heterosexual. I didn't know why we were watching that. I didn't know why they had me in the room. I didn't relate to what I believed my experience would be. It didn't relate to the conversations that I would have with my mom, because my mom was very, very transparent about the fact that heterosexual sex is not the only sex. You have the option. And I remember when I was teaching, a lot of the teachers and parents would say things like, well, you want to give the child, you want to wait till they are old enough to make the decision. How can they make a decision if they're just introduced when they become an adult? There's so much time you've now missed where they can be figuring those things out, because we don't make them wait to make a decision about their dietary health. We don't have them wait to make a decision about what we take them to get tested for at the doctor or what shots they have to get. So why are we waiting until they're an adult to introduce these things to them? The earlier you teach a child something, the less time they have to form a negative opinion from the rest of the world. And I think that if we start early, just introducing the fact that there is more than just one lane of being, it will give kids the opportunity to better understand themselves, to exist in the world in a way that is healthy, regardless of what their sexuality is.
Right. Let them be safe to ask questions.
Let them be safe to ask questions.
Yeah.
Talk about agenda, Shalil. I mean, right? When they say, this agenda, as we talked earlier, what agenda was actually being indoctrinated to you from the time that you said you were a little kid? You were, you have this long period of time to figure out for yourself what opportunities can you have, or what kind of person can you be. That agenda has already been set. It's already started establishing these thoughts about yourself that you have about yourself. Was it a reflection on your masculinity? Do you remember when you were in that class learning about sex and stuff, and just this heteronormative view?
It wasn't only because I was very confident as a kid to who I was. I didn't necessarily feel safe to ask questions in the classroom, but I was always safe to come back home and say, hey, Mom, this happened today, and they didn't talk about the things that you've talked to me about. I remember honestly giggling at a point during the video because of the way they were talking about sex. And again, it did not relate to what I learned. So I didn't necessarily feel triggered in my own masculinity, but I definitely felt like, okay, this is not a space where I can be myself. I can only be myself at home. And to what you were saying earlier about sometimes when you feel safe at home, or you feel like you understand to a certain point at home, you assume that the rest of the world is like that. So that was a kind of an awakening for me, for like, okay, everybody isn't having the conversations that Sheila's having with me and my brother. And it pushed me to have those conversations, because if they're not having them at home with their parents, then they need to hear it from somewhere. And hopefully I can be that beacon in that moment.
Well, it's funny because I'm looking at intergenerationally, because when I was in fifth grade, it was not in the 2000s. I just remember in 81, age myself, I think Reagan might have just gotten office. I remember they kept calling me, because my name was Ronald, and they kept calling me Ronald Reagan. It went from Ronald McDonald to Ronald Reagan.
Right.
They were very creative back then. And I remember in my head, in kindergarten and first grade, I actually thought my inner head voice was always a female. So I thought everybody thought they were a girl in their head. And I remember hanging out with all the girls and things like that. Now, keep in mind, I was a natural athlete. So I remember, you'd be shocked to know I went to college on a football scholarship. I was all city. I was a bad MFer. But prior to that, I remember I used to hang out with the girls, did double dutch, all those things. The boys, I hung out with the boys. The worship me like I was one of the girls. Until my dad said, boy, you'll be jumping on double dutch. I don't want no punks in my house, stuff like that. It got to the point where I would be with my best friend, my next door neighbor. We were playing double dutch, and she would see my dad's cutlass come down the street. Yeah, here comes your dad. I'd drop it and go grab the football, run across the street, and play football with the guys. And so, but in my head, I said this to one of my friends, in your generation, you all have access to all these words that we didn't have back then. So I have so many friends that unfortunately passed away through AIDS, but I have so many other friends that in other cities across the country are now went through the body modification because they felt they were trans. So back in my day, when we talk about masculinity, you either was one or the other. And in my mom's terms, you either was a boy or you was a punk. Those are the terms my parents used. In my mom's terms, a punk or a sissy were the two words that they identified gay men as. And my mom was born in the 50s. And so you had no other option. There was no GNC, no non-binary, no trans, no things. Transvestite came out later on. But these are the two terms you had. So in my peer group, a lot of people actually got silicone in their bodies. They started taking hormones illegal, things because they felt because I wasn't masculine, I was feminine, so therefore I should be a girl, and I felt like I should be a woman. It wasn't until 2000, 2, 1, that we came up with these different terms that the new generation said, oh, there's other ways to describe ourselves. So I got a whole bunch of friends who got silicone in their cheeks and breasts, and now they just want to be a dude. They say I'm non-binary. I got one friend, we laugh about it, and we talk, he's in Philadelphia, and he said, I got double D's on my chest, and I don't want them. I've had them since the 90s, they ain't going nowhere. But all that to say is that masculinity for me is I always challenge, you have to tell me what the difference between a man and a male is first. And one of the trainings I always do is I put those characteristics, I ask you to define to me what a male is and define what a female is. And then what a man and a woman is. And if the only distinction is can make a baby, can hold a baby, then you haven't given me a characteristic, you gave me biology. I think when we talk about masculinity, it's morphed over the years. Like I remember when I was 19, 20, going to the mall, and I would have a bob in my hair, wearing skirts, and we had to fight. Like there was no protected spaces then. Back in the 90s, when I was in college and I was walking around with purses before they were popular. We was fighting the homies. So when we talk about violence, I got my stripes from fighting. Because I grew up in the hood, so I knew how to fight already. But I think now that blurred line, that gender line is blurring. I think the other piece that we're struggling with now is that, again, once the privileges start to be challenged, you start holding on to minuscule things to say this, oh my God, why you got on them shoes? Boys don't wear that. Why not? Who says that? A piece of clothing doesn't make you less masculine, neither does a piece of clothing make you more feminine. These are things that we've let oppressed people put on top of us to define who we are, to make sure that we're these things there. Like for instance, I hate wearing suits. Well, ties and shirts. I feel like a fat deacon when I do. But I'm not gonna wear a certain tie. Thank you. I try. But like for instance, when I first became a social worker, I would never wear a shirt and tie because they always said you have to present professionally. Me wearing a shirt and tie does not dictate what's in my head. That does not make my 4 degrees any dumber, or make me know any less about my tuition at all. However, we have to stop these moral politics on how we genderify individuals, what we call was masculine, this toxic masculinity. I heard someone say healthy masculinity before. These are things we have to redefine for ourselves. I think the other pieces, maybe you said it, is that language is power. And the thing that I always love about language, also not only that it's power, it's liberating, and it allows culture to exist. And if I keep allowing you to find for me what is for me, then you will always control me. So once I throw that gauntlet down and say, I'm now defining who I am, and this is what I feel is masculine for me today. Tomorrow I might have on a long skirt. This week I'm going to wear a suit. Next week I may not. And so that's what I'm defining for me. And it's okay if I want to change it day to day, and I don't care if you don't understand it because it's none of your damn business. What I eat don't make you shit.
I really am appreciative of you sharing the story about the period where there was only one or the other, and people felt like, okay, well, I have to get the silicone because I experienced that, and I have spoken to all of my friends who are in the community, and none of them related to this, but I remember being in middle school and thinking, okay, I like men, so I must be a woman. I genuinely believe that either my mom made a mistake, she changed my gender, before I was of age, or I knew something had to be wrong. And I had this idea that it's cool, I'll just, keep it to myself for a long time, and then when the time is right, I would just transition to a woman. Before I knew what transitioning was or anything. And as I got older, and I learned that that's not just that simple, and that I also really enjoyed who I was in my manhood. I got to that point, but I did struggle with that. I was like, well, something's got to be wrong with me. And instead of just believing that one day I will be able to exist as I am, I felt I needed to make a change because that would then make other people around me more comfortable. And you are the first person that I've ever heard share that similar experience, and I appreciate you sharing that.
And to add to y'all's points, like, just imagine how many lives would have been saved had there been, like, information provided on these subjects to, like, kids. Like, it might seem benign, like not understanding who you are and not, like, wanting to wear these certain type of clothes, but, like, that might save them down the line, you know. Like, knowing that type of stuff might help them discover who they are earlier.
That's what I loved so much about when I had the great fortune of being able to implement our Coaching Boys and Men program in some of the schools with the athletes. When I addressed the binary nature of this conversation around masculinity, I had these young men often ask me, so Coaching Boys and Men, are you here to teach us how to be men? And I was like, whoa, I can't do that. And that was one of the great segues that I had into everything you do by virtue of being a man is masculine. If that's cry, if that's being interested in other men, if that's, doesn't matter. None of those things are a reflection of your masculinity. Your masculinity is on a spectrum as much as anything else is. It's not a binary system. And I loved having that conversation, challenging that social norm with kids, because they would sit there and look at me like, really? That's okay for me to do? Yeah, it's absolutely okay for you to cry, wear those clothes that you want to do, wear or listen to music you want to listen to, or just be you authentically.
Liberating for them too. Like, you can see, like, they're, like, genuinely happy when you tell them they can do these things that they probably have been wanting to do their whole lives.
Yeah, somebody giving them permission.
And we leash folks with how you tell what masculine jobs are from the time that we're children. Because I need that job filled. So I'm going to tell you that if you want to be a man or you want to have masculinity feature, whatever part of that, you're going to want to go do this blue collar job. You're going to want to do this service that is going to be usually low pay, a lot of hours, a lot of hard work. But that's how we're going to define you to be a man and keep you under control in those positions.
And that's when I knew I was gay, because they said, yeah, I was truck construction, no ma'am. I remember my grandma was in the kitchen with me. And she said to me, she said, sweetie, you're too smart to get a calluses on your hand and too pretty, and you're not going to be out there like your brother's cutting grass. I said, yes, Grandma, I'm not. That's what I said, no, ma'am.
Yeah,
No, ma'am.
I wasn't good at hair.
She said, stay in school, because it's not going to work for you. Yes, ma'am, she was right.
I could jump in here, and I just love this conversation that's happening, and Shalil having this aha moment over here. It kind of gets me back to something that Brandon said in his introduction. So I want to hear from y'all, but starting with Brandon here, because you made the comment, men carry hurt. And so I think we're talking around some of this right now, or not round it, but I think I really want to pinpoint this, Brandon, and talk about that. Where does this come from?
Yeah, and I want to piggyback off what Ron and Shirley were saying about, with masculinity is there isn't any joy in it. Like, there's no joy in masculinity. It's like protect, fight. Joy is, literally smashing a female. That's what joy is with being a man, and like everything else is hurt. And like, one of the things I thought was really fascinating was like, who am I? You brought up the D&D thing. I vividly remember being like, I want to play D&D in Athens City Schools, nerd, not going to get laid, all that stuff. And like, so I don't want to be that person, thing that I share, and I am jealous of the current generation. Y'all remember anime in the 90s? You like anime? Nerd. Now it's like, I love Dragon Ball. And I'm like, oh, I'm so jealous. And I think about that because one of the things that I see is we want this joy. Everyone wants this. They want to be who we are. And I think about when people see somebody from the LGBT community and they're so happy. Because, we were talking about like the agenda. The agenda is, it's not real, but when you see it, it's like, it's, Lil Nas X dancing at the Super Bowl or something like that, and people are like, I'm so jealous of that. And then that anger and that violence comes out. That's what our masculinity does, because I want to be happy. I work this blue collar job. I can't be happy. I can't go dancing. And I think that's something that's missing in our masculinity, is just that seeking joy of some level. And I really, as you can tell, that's something that affected me, because I've wanted to be so many different things, but I played sports like yourself. I've been in the locker room. I played a football game called Smear the Queer. I don't know if you remember that in the 80s. What was the object that? You'd get all the boys together, and whoever had the football, that was the queer. Never thought about that being violence or anything like that, and be like, well, I don't want to be him. I don't want to be that person, and we just accepted that violence. There's no joy in that. I don't want to get tackled by these people, but I want to be with this group of people who are my friends, So I just think about that being so pertinent to masculinity is it's like, inject that joy, and joy is everything. Is it cooking? Is it cleaning? Is it dancing? Is it telling stories? Is it hugging your friends and stuff like that? You know, how many times have you wanted to be hugged by people, but you're like, well, you know, what's the guy hug? Tap on the back. Don't get too close. Just like that. And then, you know, you haven't seen this person in 20 years. And I just really think, I just want to, you know, to speak to what y'all were saying about, you know, like not being able to be yourself, but then also seeing it, you know, a lot of times, I sometimes slip and say the queer community. I want to make sure you understand I'm not talking about gay people. I'm talking about the full, but I've been told by some friends, people think that I'm being reductive. So if I slip and say that, I'm not specifically speaking about gay men. I'm talking about the LGBTQ plus community. I just want to make sure we understand that, you know, because language is important, you know. But I just think about that so much because I think there isn't any joy. There still isn't any joy. The fact that, like, you know, it's like you got to work, you got to protect, you got to do these things that aren't fun. You know, we don't have time to just chill and talk about our feelings. That's joy to me. You know, hey, what's tough for me? So I appreciate you bringing that up because I just think that's such a piece in masculinity that is healthy, that is just like way over there. So
to your point, Brandon, I remember, well, first off, D&D means Dungeons and Dragons, that do not disturb. To you younger people,
I mean,
it does not mean do not disturb, okay?
Oh, there's language right there. Thank you.
Yeah, I actually love Dungeons and Dragons. I played it too. I remember someone saying, I'm a gay dude. I have the luxury, I don't have to follow the rules of masculinity. And there are so many rules to be masculine. It is over fucking whelming. You can't do this, you can't hug, you can't cry, you can't say, yo, bro, you can't like pink, you can't eat, I remember someone saying you can't eat a banana in public. You can't take a sucker in front of, it's so many fucking rules, just fucking eat it. I don't have to do all that. I'm a gay dude. Right. I can wear nails, I can do what the hell I want to do, I don't have to dress in a certain way, there's no rules for me. But I will also tell you, it ain't fun. It ain't no joy in rainbows. The shit that you see Nas X doing, he also got 4,000 hate death threats. He also got people talking about him all day, all night, his parents, all these things there. I think there's the other side that you don't see that comes on, that downside of it is that what we go home to, I luckily have not experienced that type of verbal violence, that type of social media hate and things like that, because I just don't allow it in my space. I have experienced it, I've seen it from other gays. In terms of individuals seeing what you allow yourself to, that happens you get, it doesn't become because of the community that you're in, it comes because of who you are internally and how you allow yourself to achieve it. If that makes sense. So because I'm gay doesn't make me happy, happy, joy, joy. It's because I found my own happiness in who I am and authentically who I am, despite of what community I'm in. Whether I strive to be in that intersection of black, gay, all these things here, I'm happy because I'm Ron. And so, but the outside of that, I also am impervious to when I'm walking down the street and I have my Gucci bag and I may have on a pair of Rick Owens platforms. I'm walking down the street and I see some of the dudes look side-eye me. Run up, get done up. I mean, because again, I'm still from the hood, so I can pull off my heels and we can fight. And because I'm an older black dude, I might be packing. I'm licensed, so these are things that I have to arm myself on. But I think the other piece is understanding that what you might see externally, it take a while for all of us to get these smiles on our faces. And so, but you don't know what we had to go through to put them on out the door because you don't never know, like you said. You never heard someone tell that before, but I have a responsibility as an elder at 49, I'm an elder in the black gay community because most of my predecessors have died because of AIDS. So that's sad to say, in my community, at almost 50, I'm the first generation that's actually going to be here and hitting it in this space. And then I'm also in the ballroom community. So I'm definitely a senior in the ballroom community, and that's a whole other discussion. We'll talk about that later. And so I have a responsibility that when I can't allow you to see me with my head down, even though sometimes I don't feel like having this confidence, even though I don't feel like these things there, because you have so many things coming at you. I remember, like I said, I mentioned in my introduction about being in my fraternity, and it'll be a year next month. One of the beautiful things that I learned about joining a historical black fraternity, male fraternity, is that I had to create a space where the heterosexual men could ask questions. And that's kind of why I love this conversation here, is that you don't know what you don't know. And I can't fault you for what you don't know. But what after I tell you and you choose to do the opposite, then I can hold you accountable. And I think that sometimes we have to have it. I never really hung out with straight men before. Outside of my brothers, my dads, and all them. And so being in a space where I'm forced to be with a straight man all the time, I didn't know straight dudes cried. I didn't know they had emotions and their way of hugging and emotions and calling me in the morning, yo, bro, what's good? I love you. Excuse me? I'm not used to that. But I also am understanding that I'm unique. I'm a unicorn in that space. So when I walked in, I have my phone now, like 25 brothers is texting me in the morning, have a good day, bro, have a good day. Ain't none on my dude. I'm looking for my dude's text. Okay, bro, what's going on? They beating you. But what I'm realizing is that I kind of changed the air of my fraternity in terms of they said that no one's ever come in and done what you've done. Like I have 65-year-old men asking me what cisgender means. They would watch something on TV and literally text me 2 a.m. next to their wives. Bro, I just watched this. Is she a transies? I don't want to be offensive. They're asking these questions, and I'm okay with you asking them and making the wrong mistake sometimes. But once I correct you, they're learning that. That's where we have to be at a space that's what curious conversation should really be at. Courageous conversation, being okay with making that mistake, but also challenging you to go past what you already know to something that's different and uncomfortable.
Right.
One thing I think is really cool about what the two of you, kind of the intersection of what the two of you said, what you mentioned authenticity, and Brandon, you referenced masculinity not being very joyful. And I just think to myself, that's one of the forms of violence perpetrated against masculinity that masculinity does to itself. I mean, it perpetrates its violence against itself by denying us those opportunities to be authentic. As a father to 3 kids, 2 girls and a son, the son being the youngest, I can't tell you how often my fingernails were painted. Me and my son had our fingernails painted, or my son running around the house as a toddler in a dress that his sisters put him in, and literally having conversations when a friend comes to the door or something, and I'm standing there with fingernail polish, and they're like, "Why do you have fingernail polish on?" What? Is my masculinity supposed to rob me from spending quality time with my little kids, or having my son, at 16 say, "Hey, don't show anybody that picture of me when I was a kid in a dress"? Masculinity is perpetrating violence against him by teaching him that he has to be embarrassed or ashamed of the fact that he was a child and experimenting with clothes and dress and make-believe. So yeah, I agree with you, Brandon, entirely. I don't think masculinity is joyful at all. It perpetrates violence against ourselves and prevents us from being our authentic selves that Ron mentioned. So.
And really quick to add to what the dialogue between Brandon and Ron, it's obvious that there's pain on both sides, whether internal or inflicted by somebody from the other side. It confuses me that people don't realize that there's pain on both sides. And if they would, then I feel like that would help move things forward a lot. You're hurting, I'm hurting, why don't we help each other out type stuff.
Yeah, healing is the goal, ultimately, for both sides. Because even as a person who seems to present more feminine in most spaces, I've been told that I'm not supposed to do certain things that are masculine. I cut a flat the other day, and I changed it. And I went and I changed it, and I got to work, and my friends my coworkers were like, what do you mean you changed it? You didn't call anybody? I said, no, I know how to change a tire. I learned how to change a tire when I was in 5th grade. I know how to change my own oil. Brandon, you were talking about wanting to be in those spaces and feeling like being a nerd was a negative thing. When I was in high school, I wanted to play baseball so bad because I'm good at it and it's fun. And I didn't play baseball because I was too effeminate. They told me that this was not a space that you can exist in. And I was better than a lot of the kids on the sorry, that's probably a little bit egotistical, but I thought I was pretty good. I thought I was pretty good. My mom thought I was pretty good. And so it's kind of flipped too, and within our community. I've been in relationships where men have made me feel like I am taking away from their existence in our relationship because I'm deciding to do something that's considered masculine because I don't want to do something else. It's as small as wearing boxers versus wearing boxer briefs. It's this has nothing to do with who you are or who I'm trying to be. It's just what I like to do, what I want to do today, and what I want to do tomorrow.
Don't be mad because I look good in both. Damn.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I have both in my bin. I think that they're both very comfortable.
And you can't be quiet anymore. You can't just pop off some profound shit like this and make me internalize and realize that, oh God, there isn't much joy in there, and the happiness isn't there. And oh my gosh, there's there's a wound inside of me that once again I didn't know existed because somebody defined masculinity for me way early in life. So thanks for that. Now, but I can heal now, so thank you for that.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's like, and I feel like that's what drives me here. We always think about be that person, that you needed when you were younger, and that's why I'm like, yeah, older Brandon needs to come in and just kick that door down and lay the D&D tape, just play, stuff like that. I think is really important, and because there is, and I did want to preface. I know it sounded like people think that when we see Little Nas X that we think the life. I'm aware that their life is hard, but like I think a lot of people, to our earlier question, I think a lot of people really aren't aware of any of this. I know always people know, like, Javon, you mentioned that, the statistics, people hear that, but they don't understand that, so the paradigm shift you're talking about, Ron, we're like, oh, well, those, people are homeless. They must be homeless because they're lazy, or something. They don't think that them being trans has anything to do with it. And so they just let it be. It's like, oh, well, that's it, because there's no connection there. And that's why I really think these conversations are helpful too. It's more than you have to care, like I know a big part of why I'm here is, my godfather, when he was alive, he was gay, but I wasn't an ally, but he was the gay person in my life. I've got 2 cousins who are gay who were very in the closet for a while. And so once again, not being an ally, but now I'm like, you know what, I have the tools to kind of figure that. And, there was something that I saw that's moved me to be like, now I see what that violence looks like, and I don't think most of the world cares because there is so much. Yes, we talk about the information is there. Yeah, you can Google it, but I have to also make the connection of like, oh, there's violence. That is violence, not supporting this or not being in yourself or even seeing the violence in ourselves. Because it's like, most men are just like, this is what I do. I got a good job. My kids are healthy. I'm good. Happy wife, happy life. That's the crap that we tell ourselves. Like that excludes half the world. And so I really think like that's a big part of making it. Just because you see something doesn't mean you understand something. And that's my concern is when you see these statistics, you can't make sense of it, because that paradigm is, oh, well, why are people poor? They're lazy. Let's drug test them. Like, no, there's so many other things going on there that we don't give context to. And that's why I'm really happy these conversations can expand. So then when you see that, people are dying at this rate or, just what is the statistic I heard about men dying at a higher rate of skin cancer because we don't wear, suntan lotion because that's gay, So now we're literally dying because of something completely, so I'm trying to shift that. I just think that's like a thing that we can do a lot more. That's why we're doing this. But I just think about when we say awareness, you can see something but not understand it. So,
well, isn't that representation part of? I mean, you mentioned Nas X, the two of you. Isn't that part of that cognitive dissonance that happens with? I'll say I think that that's part of the cognitive dissonance that I've seen with my kids is that they see this representation of what a gay person is supposed to look like, and my daughters will see on TikTok and on Instagram these people who are the representatives, in the public image of what this, and they're living these amazing lives. And meanwhile, my daughter goes to school and gets referenced as a D all the time, and just openly referenced about her sexuality. And she's like that. She comes home. She, I don't understand. It's supposed to look like this because this is what I'm seeing. But on a daily basis, the social norm is this, and a tolerance for it. I think that's what bothers my kids when they talk to me about this so much is it's less, and I think this gets back to Ron's point, you'd rather have this person be openly prejudiced or biased right in front of you, right? Because that's, I think that my daughters expressed to me often that they think that it shouldn't be, that we shouldn't still be having these challenges, but it's just all around them, and they're fine with the person doing it. What shocks them is that everybody else in the room just sits quietly and doesn't say a thing. But then after class comes up and says, "Oh, I'm so sorry, Ava. I'm so sorry, Lauren. Sorry that happened to you." It's like, where were you 3 seconds ago? Just said. I guess that gets back to your point, Brandon, when you mentioned earlier that it's not about just being an ally. It's about being anti-racist, anti-homophobic. Working specifically and deliberately and intentionally against. So.
So go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I think trying to think which way to go. Okay, I think we'll talk about ally. I love the word, and it gets a great spin on it, but it also has a negative connotation too, because sometimes allies co-opt your struggle as their own. And so, like in your example with your daughter, at that time, that ally was complicit. If somebody, and regardless of what's happening, if I see somebody being wronged, I'm jumping up and saying, well, okay, back up. Because that's who I am. That we didn't know what that was before. That was me picking up. Because if a bully is bullying somebody, I love a good fight. I told you I'm a fighter. So, I got good hands. So regardless of what's happening, I'm jumping in. We didn't know it was called an ally back then, but I just like beating up the bully. My daddy told me you hit the one with the biggest and the loudest mouth. You pop them first, they ain't gonna mess with you no more. So, but I think the other part about being an ally is I like the term anti, but I also like the term accomplice. Not because accomplice means that I'm also sitting next with you and sometimes in front of you. In order to get movements happening, those who are the victims in that movement don't actually have the power to make the movement move forward. If you look at the AIDS crisis, the epidemic, the gay men couldn't move it forward. When ACT UP went in, it wasn't them who did it. You know who did it? The White Housewives. Elizabeth Taylor now. They said, oh no, our hairdressers, our fellow actors, our Broadway actors, they're dying. It was them that formed, it was the white women that said, oh no, we need to move this forward. The privilege had to be allies to come and move this movement forward. You have to have the allies to start it because nobody's going to listen. I think the other part about allyship is that understanding when you have to take a step back. Because sometimes you're so much of an ally, then I can't breathe. I can't get my words out. Then you're speaking for me. Like just as I can't speak for every black man, I can speak for every black gay man, every ally can't speak for my cause because you don't walk in my shoes. So sometimes you co-opt that trauma, that movement, and then you change the spirit of it. And so what I love about it being an ally is knowing when I tag you, and I always think about it as a wrestling match. All right, y'all, come tag your partner. Come on, get it. Or walk hand beside me. I remember in 2020, there was a march. I don't remember where it was at. And I want to remember there was a group of white mothers who came out, and the police were going to attack. It was Black Lives Matter movement. The police were coming to spray mace to the crowd, and these bunch of white mothers stepped out right in front of them. Arm, no, you're not. And they stopped. Oh shit. What do we do now? Here come the protected ones. What do we do now? And they backed up. And they said, we're going to stand beside you. And it was a whole bunch of just started surrounding the crowd. And I thought it was the most powerful example of what an ally is. And that's sometimes what you need. But at the same time, I have to be an ally for my heterosexuals too. I remember, I work at Equitas. I remember there's quite a few heterosexual men that work there. And I remember one of them said to me, sometimes I don't feel like I have a space here. You do. You always have a space at the table because your perspective is just as important as mine. Because so many people have so much trauma and hurt based off of their assumption of what you are or what their daddy didn't do for them, is they project it onto you. And when we talk about healing, healing is perpetual. So we can be healed from a scar, but an emotional healing and a mental healing, that's ongoing. You can find tools to kind of you tie it up a little bit. I'm thinking in my head like, I'm a nerd, so I'm thinking like the bender, the water bender thing. You shoot it. But sometimes it comes undone. And so it's perpetual, it's ongoing because things were triggered. That's what a trigger is. Because people say, oh, I'm in therapy, then I got triggered and it came back again. That means that you haven't fully been healed. That means it's ongoing. The tools are always doing. So that's what we have to understand. There's a space for both of us, so we all have to ally for each other. That's where that compromise, that's where the anti comes on both sides.
I think that's perfect. That segues right into the next question that I had, which was, how would you define being an ally? If you give an example of like good allyship that you have seen or who you have done, how would you define being?
Sure, but it's pretty much not what Ron was explaining. Like you can't be there for the attractiveness of being an ally, like you were saying. Like you can't be an ally online and then go through the phenomena that Roy was talking about. Like in person, somebody's getting persecuted and you just sit and watch, and then come later and say, "Oh, I'm sorry that happened." Or you can't be the savior type that like tries to take the spotlight, put it on you. You got to be. It's kind of hard to define what a good ally is, but it's a lot that goes into it, and it's very subtle. But I think Ron pretty much described it great. What not to do.
Well, Chance, that's one of the things I think you mentioned. You can't be the savior, and I think where I enter this space as into allyship and more the anti, obviously, component of that role of mine is that I've had to. I enter this space because I'm a father to 2 children, so they were not capable as little kids of having that voice for themselves, and so it put me in some weird situations where I didn't know how much I get to be the savior to my 2 children. I'm not. It's not like another adult like Ron. I can't be your savior, but to my little kid, who else can? Who else has to be? And I oftentimes have colleagues, friends say, Roy, settle down. You don't have to be so angry about things. You don't have to be so, persistent and determined about things. And it's like, yes, I absolutely do, because I see them legislating laws against and legislating rights away from my children. So yeah, there's going to be a sign in my yard, and yes, I'm going to call out you for your sign in your yard. We're going to have a conversation about that across yards. I do have to speak. I do have to act out because my children's rights are being voted away from them on myths and lies and agendas. So when we talk agendas that we mentioned earlier, that's the agenda I'm most concerned about is the agenda to take away rights away from my children. So yeah, allyship to me is stepping in, jumping in, having conversations, and being in those spaces to protect my children.
I think there's a difference, though, between being an advocate, which is what I think what you're doing is, and being a savior.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, the dynamic is obviously different. Like, if you're trying to help just a regular LGBTQ plus person in the street and helping your kids. But, like, I know it's kind of shifted today because you can't be in the classroom with your kid and, argue with kids who are calling your kids names. But there is a big difference between being, like, an advocate and this kind of savior. I think, like, an analogy would be like a white savior, like somebody who goes to Africa and, like, helps these kids, but, like, only when the camera's on. And then when the camera's off, they're like, just go back home. So there's a big difference, but yeah.
And I think the difference is actually understanding what you're advocating for. When I was in college, it was the first time I realized that all the non-LGBTQ identifying men in my life who were calling themselves allies actually weren't. Because my college roommate, who neither of us were excited about rooming with each other, but immediately after meeting, we were like the best of friends. We're the best of friends now. And we would go to lunch together and meet each other after class, and people knew who we were. And I remember he came to the dorm one day and he was like, yeah, somebody asked me if we were dating. And I was like, oh, what'd you say? And he was like, I said we weren't. And I said, how does that make you feel? And I'm scared because I'm like, oh my goodness, now I brought this on you because you're spending time with me. And he not pretended, excuse me. He was not fazed. He did not care. It was not a big deal to him. And I was the one who was concerned. I'm like, I don't want you walking around campus with people having this idea of you. He said, well, it's not a negative idea to have. And that changed my perspective entirely because I thought it was a negative idea to have. I thought because this isn't who you are and people think that this is who you are, it was negative. And he said, if I thought it was negative that people thought that about me, then that would mean that I would think negatively about you because that is who you are. And he said, that wouldn't make any sense. And I had to reshape my mind and then look back at everyone else because I know that some of the men in my life who called themselves allies, if they were approached with, anyone thinking that they were anything but heterosexual, they'd be very upset and very uncomfortable. And why is that? Because the idea that someone would associate you with homosexuality is negative, is bad. And that changed my perspective. And like I said, the difference I think is what you feel and what you believe about what you're advocating for. If you genuinely believe it is a okay thing to be or an okay way to live your life, then you're not going to have a negative opinion when someone approaches you with it when it regards yourself.
Mm-hmm. You'll be able to take that flack easier because it's something, it's like a personal mission for you. And it's like a personal conviction that you have as opposed to somebody who's like the casual ally that like as soon as it gets like hard to be an ally, they switch up. So yeah, it's very important to be a good ally.
So I also think there is levels to it, and being an ally is a large responsibility and can be a large undertaking for a lot of people. And so there is levels to it. Ally can look like I'm teaching my son and daughter proper terms to use. I'm teaching my father who's in his 80s don't say those words anymore. That's allyship. In my circle, I'm changing the mindsets and how we review other individuals who aren't like us, and that's allyship on a smaller scale. Everyone's not going to be in a space and for safety reasons, financial reasons, because everybody can't go and march and raise their fist and knock down. That's not realistic for everybody, and everybody doesn't have the capacity to do that, and that's not everybody's calling. But ally looks like the same way that you present in person is the same way you present behind closed doors. That's what an ally is.
That's why it's so hard to define, because it's different person to person. There's no general ally or like ally handbook that you need to follow to be an ally.
Yeah, handbook would be great about right now.
Right.
With all this stuff. Yeah.
Along with our letter for the agenda.
Right. That's
letter,
I changed my address too. I lost my ally
We all need
letter.
to sign off on the agenda.
Yeah.
Something I want to mention, like that I thought, and you brought this up, Ron, was how not to be an ally. And this isn't a courageous space or something, but I remember Javon sharing this, and I think this is something helpful not to do. Is a lot of us are doing this because of something. If it's a person or something trying to heal or something, and it can be very personal. And so, like, Ron, you're talking about don't be front and center, and I think trying to really check that is important because, it feels good. Like this probably feels good for us to be in this space and speak, and so that high can take you to a lot of different spaces. Hey, come speak here. Tell us your story, Brandon. I'll just use myself as an example. Tell us your story, and I'll just keep talking about myself and not do anything for the community that I'm supposedly advocating for. And so I think that's an important thing to check, because it's easy to just go too far and not make any space for authentic voices. It's like Black Lives Matter. I get tired of hearing white people talk, and I went through this and I went through this. And it's like, really, shut up. Like I'm living this, but also I think for me being an ally is really being vulnerable, and being able to have a really scary conversation with somebody you care about. Talk about your roommate, you're like worried if they were good this or that. Like imagine if your roommate was worried about that, they didn't feel comfortable asking you, are they really being an ally? And so I think being able to, because then you learn, you step into it, you say something horrible, like I said, I used to say queer community all the time for the LGBTQ community, and then my friend was like, hey, listen, Brandon, like I know what you mean by that, but other people don't know. And I was like, well, what do you mean? And I got defensive, and I was like, you're right, like being able to be like that, but also like when you get tapped to do, like, it feels like we're all ambassadors. When you get tapped and you're not part of the community, be like, that'd be great if I spoke, but I got Shali over here. Why don't you let that, or can Shil come with and then speak half or something like that? Open that door, like you're talking about the white women with the shield, because we have that privilege to be like, who's on your board? Have you thought about asking about, anti-racism or anti-home, just asking the question. Like you can affect spaces you're in very easily. Like one of the things that I hate is any nonprofit, how you got on the board. Let's ask our friends. Who do you get? More of the same fucking people. So why don't you ask some questions, or even just have a questionnaire or send it out to a group so you get different people? Because one of the things that I found on my journey is you gotta talk to the people in the community. That's the only way it's gonna work. You can read stuff all day, you can see stuff, but if you're not hearing the voices every day, like you're not gonna change. I've been following people on Instagram, and it's fascinating to hear somebody from the LGBTQ community talk about the Super Bowl, but from their lens, not something super important, but from their lens, like, I never thought about that, and I think that's really important. That's something we can do as allies, is talk to it, because I think I'm gonna quote Wu-Tang, but like a small exit, small entrance, wide exit, like a funnel. Like you start small, I'm here, I'm getting all this information, and then it goes to my 10 friends that I play, Overwatch 2 with. I'm like, hey, did you know this? Because you have to meet them somewhere. You can't be just show up and, did you know this happens? Did you know this happens and this? And you need to care. It's like, yo, what? What is healthy masculinity? Like, you've got to distill it in some way and use that. And I feel like that's what allyship can look like when you're really just like starting small. Like you're talking about, there's levels to it. Maybe you just start with your family, but really connect with those people in your world and get them to do something. Because, if you're just healing yourself, that's better than doing nothing. But that's easy, and I just feel like they can be more. And people say, I'm not gonna rally or something like that. But I think that's a really important piece of just taking that and then just affecting the people around you in a way because they trust you.
Yeah, I also think it's kind of important and a lot of folks have brought up privilege and that kind of subject matter. and I think part of being an ally, a big part of it is, even if you don't know you have privileges, this doesn't necessarily apply to your resources, but you have to surrender the ones even you don't know about to be an ally. So I can find mine, is in the gay community. The same goes with a white person coming up for Black Lives Matter. I need to make sure my privilege is gone. Otherwise, I'm not relating at all. I shouldn't be here. This is not about me. I need to be an ally and be there for you. I need to make sure my soapbox is your soapbox. You get to stand on this. You rise yourself up. Let's double stack. You got your own. Here's mine. I'm going to stand here. I'm going to catch you if you start to falter. I'll be there. I'll be your ally in every way possible as I can be. Can't save you. I'm not your savior. I will. If your voice starts to shake, I'll give you my voice. I'll give you the energy from me to do that. But I'm going to give you whatever privilege I have inside of me to support you as an ally. Yeah, definitely call to action. It's one of those things that you brought up before, and it was a hard thing to think about. And I thought a lot on masculinity and how people put that into the foundation. And I think that masculinity, sure, it's great to have it, but it shouldn't be a foundational quality per se, unless you've got it well defined with a set of morals and strong background. I would say that replace that in your foundation with compassion, and always push compassion for it. Let masculinity be part of the building that sits upon that, and understand that at no point in time is that building guaranteed to stand. Any storm can come and knock that down, an earthquake can come and knock it down, but your foundation's still going to be there. Okay, so keep compassion there so you can always rebuild, always support, and always move forward with folks.
Yeah, I would say I guess from my position, I think a call to action for me and what that looks like for me is, and I think this is going to play off a little bit of all the discussion that we've had regarding what does an ally look like and the suffering that the masculinity causes us. But to me, it's intervening in this idea and notion that people feel safe in explicitly being hurtful, hateful, and unjust, prejudiced, and biased. That's my call to action. When you see that occurring, whatever your level of allyship, wherever you're at, whether it is just that with your 80-year-old aged father, or your neighbor, or a coworker, intervene. There shouldn't be room for that kind of open hate. That hate needs to be put away and hid, because I would say I just don't have a great deal of tolerance at my age now. I'm becoming less tolerant. People say when you get older, you get a little more mellow. It's working the opposite for me. So yeah, my call to action is intervene when you see hateful behavior.
My takeaways would be that this talk was really beneficial on like a personal level. It sparked a lot of internal, introspective thoughts for me on topics such as masculinity, allyship, and many more things. And I guess my call to action would be for like younger people in general. We may seem like we're doing the right things. It may seem really progressive, but that doesn't mean stagnate. That doesn't mean we're at the point where we need to be. I would say to like keep pushing forward. And for Black men in general, I would say to try and like open your heart and try and view LGBTQ plus people as people, because that's what they are, and they deserve everything that you get. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, for me, this has been awesome. I mean, my first call to action, I'd like to stay with y'all connected in some way. We don't got to be friends, but just some way so I can hear. Like, just hearing these voices is so helpful. That's something for me I think is important. Also, if you're watching this, listen to this, like, find new voices, just like you heard today. You heard a bunch of different views, maybe some new things. Like, you've got to disrupt whatever you're doing right now, whether it's, if you're on social media all the time, watching TV, radio, podcasts, think about who's speaking to you, who you're listening to. Are they like you? Are they all the same race, the same gender, same heterosexuality, sexuality? Like, what is it? Economic class. Like, find some new voices. And if you don't know, and you're watching this, you can email us. Like, go to OHMAN and you can find some resources. But like, I think that's really helpful to do that. And then for me, it's like, if you're like 35 or up, realize you are those adults that you thought didn't get it, and we don't get it either for the youth. I think that's something I'm always fascinated about. I'm 43. I'm like, oh no, I still get it. And I'm with these high school students who are literally less than half my age, or more than half my age. And I'm like, I know what their experience is like. It's I don't, I really don't. We need to listen to them, but also realize we do have knowledge that we can share. And that, if you're younger, we do know some stuff. We've seen some stuff. The world is a little bit better, but it's tricky. So I just think that's the thing I always hear about. Is like, oh, these kids, they've got all their social media, and that it's so much easier because there's so much more. There's so many more terms. Yes, there's ways to name the harm we're having, and I guess that's helpful, but that doesn't take the harm away. Actually, being aware of more harm can be really freaking painful, So being aware of that, I think, is really important, because I hear that being tossed around, like they have so much more access than we did, and so they must be fine. No, they're seeing so much more harm, and that, we as older people have that privilege to, sometimes shield them from that or intervene or whatever. And I think that's a call to action. I think if you're a parent or in charge of younger people, that you can do something about that. And if you don't know what to do, just ask. Because right now you're not doing enough. We're all not doing enough. So, if you're really not sure, make sure you ask somebody.
So you're saying to have courageous conversations?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Somewhere.
I think my call to action is intentionality, to move forward with the intention to take the information that I receive. We've shared so many stories that are different, and many that are new to me. And so just to intentionally take them with me as I am in other spaces where these kind of conversations present themselves, or I'm in spaces where they need to be presented. The stories that I've heard today need to be shared. Yeah, especially regarding the violence. Like I know a lot of us talked about the privilege of not experiencing some of our experiences, and the hardship of those of us who have had to experience those hardships. So just intentionally taking that information and plugging it in spaces that it needs to be put.
How long do I got? I think I'll speak someone's name. I don't know if you all familiar who Bayard Rustin is. Anybody know who Bayard Rustin is? For those who don't, Bayard Rustin was Martin Luther King Jr.'s best friend. He was also a openly black gay man. He was told he had separated himself from Martin Luther King Jr. Because they didn't want him to be linked with a gay man. He also was the organizer of the March of Washington. And so in history, he's kind of forgotten because he was an openly black gay man. And I say his name because now there's a movie coming out about him. We're learning about him. I just learned about it about 10 years ago. But I won't be Bayard Rustin, because I'm not going to go silently into the night, because we've always been here. We were here during the Harlem Renaissance. All the LGBT members, all members of the LGBT community in 1920. The literary and musical revolution of America, the Renaissance of America. So my takeaway is probably going to be a quote from him. We're all one, and if we don't know it, we'll learn it the hard way. Understanding that the sum of one is the sum of us all. So who I am is who I've always been authentically. And the reason you're upset with me is because you're not authentically yourself.
Yes.
Mic drop.